book published by Hong Kong University Press on the Huainan Zi. Zi means master. Huainan was a district of ancient China. This book, the Huainan Zi, was written about 139 BC. And it was a present. The writing of the book was done to commemorate a new emperor in the Han dynasty, the greatest of all the Han emperors. His name was Han from the dynasty, and then Wu, and then Ti, which meant Supreme Lord. So he was the Supreme Lord of the Han dynasty with the middle name Wu, and Han Wu Ti ruled China for over 50 years. And in his time, Han China expanded itself and became literally the Asian equivalent of the Roman Empire. Han China dominated everything between Korea and Iran, between Siberia and Vietnam. And it was the first time that the Chinese established a hegemony over such a wide area that the Chinese people themselves constituted for a while a minority within the empire. And so it's in Han Wu Ti's reign that the Chinese, classical Chinese, began to refer to themselves as Chinese, or people of the Han. People of this dynasty were the people in charge. And they took their name from Qin Huangdi, who was the builder of the Great Wall, who was the great dominant ruler just before the establishment of the Han dynasty. The author of the Huainan Zi was Prince Luan, who was a nephew of Han Wu Ti, older than him by about 15 years. And so when his uncle took power over this enlarging Chinese world, the question that came up the very first year in Han Wu Ti's long reign was, well, we are Chinese, what do we stand for? What is distinctive about Chinese culture? Now, they already had instituted the beginnings of a Confucian-ordered civil servant system. But this was to set up an administrative way to run this empire. Han Wu Ti, for instance, had under him a pyramid of 130,000 people whose only position was to make the state run on his behalf. He was the only man at the top. So his nephew wrote this extremely interesting discussion of what was really essential about Chinese culture. What was really particular and peculiar about the Chinese mind, so that they would stand out in this enlarged empire as the true central people. They would be deserving of the right to rule, of receiving the mandate from heaven, and of Han Wu Ti representing a great family line. In order to write the Huainan Zi, Prince Luan had a series of several dozen persons. We would call them intellectuals. They were called persons of unusual capacity, who met at his home in the Huainan district. And through discussions about the Tao over a period of about a year, came up with some particular perspectives that were worth writing down. And so 21 chapters of the Huainan Zi were presented by Prince Luan to the young Emperor Han Wu Ti to establish for him a cultural matrix out of which to rule over a wide, disparate population. A lineage that went deeper than the Confucian order, because at its heart, the Confucian order simply reminded those who followed it that this was the epitome of better days in ancient times. The whole reason for Confucius was to say, we better remember ancient times and better days, because look at the days now and look at the people around. If we don't remember the past in a selective way, we're not going to survive, much less prevail. But the ancient people were not Confucians by definition. The Confucians were the reminders that the ancients were valuable. So in the Huainanzi, the discussion got around to what were ancient wisdom people like? And they found that the eye through which they could see further into the past than the Confucian order was Lao Tzu. Because Lao Tzu embodied the wisdom of ancient man. In a way, Lao Tzu was the last ancient man. It's like in our state of California early in the 20th century. The last wild Indian, Ishi, came out of the Mount Shasta wilderness just before the First World War and astounded the anthropological world because they had a living specimen, a living wild Indian who had never been acculturated. Lao Tzu was in this way an unacculturated ancient sage. And so the Tao Te Ching became a focus in the Huainanzi, and it became a focus of the discussions. How may we understand this very special kind of human being, the spirit man, or to put it in perhaps ancient Chinese terms, the dragon man, the human being who is more at home in the dragon's realm than in the human world, is willing to come into the human world occasionally, but not to found his sense of intelligence there, not to mature his sense of heart there. His intelligence and his heart are tuned and matured to the Tao. And so there came, in the Han Dynasty, in the latter third of the 2nd century BC, because of the Huainanzi, an understanding that what made the ancient sages superior was that their resonance was as deep as the Tao. And that this resonance, being as deep as the Tao, allowed them to participate in energy tuning, such that they were like the pitch pipe of deeper behavior, that while the Confucian order was very good for running the empire itself had to fit into nature, and nature itself reflects the Tao. In chapter 6 of the Huainanzi, its translation in this volume from Hong Kong University Press, the title of the chapter translates, Peering into the Obscure. Peering into the obscure. And the Chinese mystical understanding is the same as the mystical understanding everywhere else on the planet. And that is this. As we direct our whole attention, we do not any longer just see things, but the context of things becomes equally important. The background is at least as important as the forms. And the weaving of the forms in the background into a tapestry that amplifies and extends and eventually comes to not represent anything other than itself. And as itself, the seamless world presents truth. And that this truthfulness occurs to one out of an accumulated penetration, a perception which is honed not to things, but to see in the details of things the allness, and to intuit in the allness the detailed and filigreed working of the seamless whole. And so this chapter, peering into the obscure in the financer, captures this sense that at the root of accumulated penetration is the attunement with the harmony. And it translates like this, a little section of it. When the lute tuner, and you have to understand in Chinese music there's a pentatonic scale. When the lute tuner strikes the kung note on one instrument, the kung note on another instrument responds. So if you strike this note on this string, if there is another musical instrument in tune, in the room, that string will also vibrate. When he plucks the qiao note on one instrument, the qiao note on another instrument vibrates. In other words, this is absolutely true. You can see it for yourself graphically. You could make a metaphor and say that there's an invisible musician who accompanies you on the other instrument. And as you would play this instrument, the other instrument's strings would vibrate. The Huinenzi continues. This results from having corresponding musical notes in mutual harmony. In mutual harmony. In other words, there's an exchange of positions. Just like in the trigrams of the I Ching, fire and water are the first to exchange. And because they can exchange, their context also can exchange. The center of the yin can survive in the yang progression, and the center of the yang can survive in the middle of the yin progression. It's a quality of saying that at the centers is an exchange, just as at the ends there's an exchange. If you go just so far in yang, eventually it will become yin again. So the extremes have a transformation, but the middles also have a transformation. So that instead of just getting a circle, which is an ecological cycle, rather simplistically, you have an ecological cycle that has the middles exchanging as well as the ends, and that gives you an infinity sign, a figure 8. It means also that there is a kind of a double quality if you don't see it right. If you look at it in two-dimensional qualities, the infinity sign looks like two circles. And you think that their tangent point, where they touch, is where the importance lies. But this is not true. In that double exchange ecology, what is established are two correspondent resonant centers. It's like a pair of berry centers at the middle of the two circles. So that when you see the Tai Chi symbol, which is the symbol for the Tao, it has two circles in there, the light and the dark. They, in one way, are images of fire and water, but they present the truthfulness that there's always an exchanged attunement. Here's how the Huinenzi then continues. Mutual harmony. corresponding. Now, someone changes the tuning of one string in such a way that it does not match any of the 5 notes. And by striking it, sets all 25 strings resonating. In this case, there has as yet been no differentiation as regards sound. In other words, you have introduced a kind of a chaos, not a dissonance, but a chaos, which the Huinanzi characterizes as no differentiation as regards sound. So that there's no articulate expression possible. Only when the instruments are tuned again will differentiation as to sound be reestablished and music then be capable of being played. The Huinanzi, under the aegis of Prince Luan, is counseling Han Wuti to understand that if you are not in tune, there is no way that the empire is going to work. No way whatsoever. But in order to establish your attunement, you must establish it in correspondence with someone else. You cannot, in isolation, expect, unless you, by some chance, have perfect pitch, psychic perfect pitch, you cannot tune yourself. So you have to have someone else to tune yourself with. And it introduced the fundamental, without making a big thing out of it, the fundamental realization that even the emperor at the top needs someone else. Now, the way that Han Wuti's personality was, he was a vivacious, voracious ruler. He wanted to get things done, and he did. But recognizing that he needed someone to tune himself with, his natural thought, as a man's natural thought would be, that I must have the right woman to tune myself with. But I am emperor of this world. Who can I find to tune myself with? For everyone in my empire is under me, and I am responsible for their welfare, as the mandate of heaven is mine alone. And so he was in a conundrum until he recalled that scouts in the far west, several thousand miles away, had reported another civilization in the far west, and that this civilization in the far west was ruled by a woman. The Queen of the West became the absolute indispensable necessity for Han Wuti. To establish his tuning, he had to meet her. And so one of the apocryphal stories of Chinese civilization is the meeting of Han Wuti and the mysterious Queen of the West, probably from some ancient Persian kingdom. She came to Chang'an, today called Xi'an, on the Wei River. And here is how the mythological record of his attunement with her went. He asked her for the secret of immortality, and she said, I can give it to you, but it is in the pith of these special peaches which only grow in my kingdom. And I have brought you the seeds for a peach tree to plant here in your kingdom. And he said, by all means, I recognize that I need this. She said, there is one realization that is necessary, though, to go with these peaches. When you plant these seeds and the trees mature, they will not bear their first crop of peaches for 3,000 years. When those peaches mature in that first crop, you will then have your immortality. I guarantee this to you. So you can see a little bit of ancient Persian wisdom vis-a-vis the Chinese world order. Here's how the Huinenzi continues. It just happens that that sound which governs all musical notes has been evoked. Thus, he who is merged with supreme harmony is beclouded as if dead drunk. Now, how do we follow this? We are used to thinking in a kind of a Greek-oriented way that a really great mystic will be so pristinely focused that they will be somber perfect, and that we will know the minute that we see such a great figure. Whereas in the Chinese Taoist tradition, you might miss the greatest mystic of all time by thinking that he's just nobody fooling around. Because he is in tune with the supreme harmony. And in this world, the supreme harmony registers as chaos. And so he, being in tune with the supreme harmony, is chaotic in this world. Later on, it comes down in Chan Buddhism, the forebearer of Zen, that the wisest of all mystical sages are sometimes the beggars who sweep the kitchen out and chuckle to themselves when they see the moon rising over the trees. So this quality is always there in the Taoist tradition. Now we come to the 4 chapters at the very center of our translation of the Tao Te Ching. Chapter 74 is called Working Through Delusion. Working through delusion. How do we work through delusion? By peering into the obscure long enough and comprehensively enough to let the allness of the particular situation occur to us and include us. When it does, we must let ourselves go to that as it is expressed and presented in this world, no matter what it is. We cannot prejudge what it's going to be. We cannot have some ideal of what it should be. We cannot have some prejudice that it must be. It will be whatever it is at this particular moment in this particular place. And so we must give ourselves up to the moment, to that. So this chapter is called Working Through Delusion. And my translation runs like this. The people not fear death, thence how with death scare them? If make the people always fear death, and any do the new, you in not te seize and kill them, who will dare? Always there is a killer to kill who kills. Now phasing away, killing the killer. This is called taking the place of the great Carpenter's work. Now, taking the place of the great Carpenter's work, one is rare, if not injure his hands. Okay? So you can see that Lao Tzu is incredibly capable at a kind of recursive, pretzel-like contortion of language. Here's how Wing-Tsit Chan makes the translation of this particular chapter. The people are not afraid of death. Why then threaten them with death? Suppose the people are always afraid of death, and we can seize those who are vicious and kill them. Who would dare to do so? There is always the master executioner, heaven, who kills. To undertake executions for the master executioner is like hewing wood for the master carpenter. Whoever undertakes to hew wood for the master carpenter rarely escapes injuring his whole hands. Now you can see that though Wingsit Chan, very famous professor, a whole shelf of books to his credit, reads Chinese perfectly well, very educated, his translation has a particular quality of limitation. It is Neo-Confucian in basis and Ming Dynasty in conception, and 20th century in execution. This is not Lao Tzu. He never heard of the 20th century. He never heard of the Ming Dynasty. He never heard of Neo-Confucianism. He never even heard of Confucianism. He was before all of that. So that when it comes to translating Lao Tzu, you have to talk Lao Tzu. You have to let him talk. No matter how screwy it sounds at first, you have to let him just talk, to have his say. To say it in the way in which the Chinese characters come out. Now let's go through this slowly. The whole strategic senses were, in this chapter, working through delusion. Remember now, a delusion is believing in an illusion, an illusionary perceptual quality which you come to believe in, and the belief in it is the delusion. The difference between illusion and delusion: illusion is what you perceive, and delusion is what you believe consequent to seeing it that way. If I say to you that I only have one hand, and you only see one hand, then that's an illusion. But if you come to characterize me as one-handed and think about me in those terms, that's delusionary. How do you work through delusion? By going back through the base, the foundation that set it up in the first place. What set up the delusion? The illusion. And so by seeing through the illusion, one works through the delusion very quickly. If you try to unbelieve your beliefs, you come into a very perilous and dangerous situation of self-doubt. You will doubt yourself, your capacity to distinguish, before you will doubt the delusion. It's human nature. You will just as soon tear up your ability to discriminate accurately before you will tear up a false belief. If you're able to tear up before the false belief your ability to discriminate, the concomitant loss of self-confidence is rather deflating. And that's when despair comes in. And despair reinforces the delusion. Because now you not only still believe in the delusory situation, but you also disbelieve in yourself. And so you become secretly dependent on the delusion to work things out for you. Now the trouble with that is that those who manipulate illusion become the bona fide rulers of your life, of your preferences. And this is how Lao Tzu sees what we would call today politics. People manipulating the illusions and the concomitant delusions. And who are we to question? Lao Tzu then writes this, chapter 74. The people not fear death Thence how with death scare them. Usually, how do you manipulate human beings? By fear. Fear is usually the tyrannical emotional currency that is spent, creating fearfulness. Perhaps some of you have been blessed by not having lived in interesting times where fear is in the air. Perhaps some of you have. When fear, social fear, is in the air, you can taste it. There's no doubt whatsoever. It is a palpable emotional tone. And it colors everything that one does. To be free from fear is a kind of waking up from delusion. It's a penetrating through. If the people not fear death, that's how with death scare them. If make the people always fear death, and any do something new, you, in a not-te way, seize and kill them, then who will dare? Always, though, always, if you kill, there is someone who will kill you for killing, and someone who will kill them for killing, someone who will kill them for killing. In other words, there is an endless. Always there is a killer to kill who kills. So that you have a death world that results. You have a death world in several different ways. You have a death world where people are so imbued with this that they lose their fear of death. It's just too much death. You finally lose your fear of death, not through courage, but through being numbed. All of us would react if we saw someone hit with a club right in front of us. And we would just be hurt, our feelings and everything. And yet if you see it, hour after hour, thousands of people, you lose your sense of response to it. It's just what is happening. The desensitization. So Lao Tzu is saying that here is a death world. It's a death world because people are so numbed by it that they do not fear death. How are you going to scare them with death? If you make the people always fear death, and that anybody tries to do something new, tries to do something other than what is status quo in this death world, then you seize them anyway and kill them, even if they're not afraid. There is someone still who will come back and kill you, and someone who will kill your killer. So he says, now phasing away this killing the killer. How do you stop a situation where there's indefinite vendetta? Remember that there's a 5-phase energy cycle. Always by shifting the phase of an event, we'll take it out of that cycle. Not by physically pushing it, not by psychically wishing it to be different, not by intellectually or emotionally, but there is a way, a Taoist way, and that is to make a transformation of phase happen. Now, how do you do that? Where is the handle of events that you can do that? Events do not have that kind of a handle. But a mix of events always is sensitive to someone who has a spirit tone. And someone with a spirit tone can change, can transform. How can they transform a phase? By putting themselves into harmony with something corresponding. It takes the event out of the worldly cycle in which it is and harmonizes it with the spiritual person, and then comes up in a correspondent way, some in a different mode. It seems uncanny, and yet somebody who is really practiced at this can do this. It's not magic, although seemingly it's like magic, but it's a spiritual transformation. So, phasing away, killing the killer. This is called taking the place of the great Carpenter's work. In other words, a kind of a creator of the world, a great carpenter, who makes these laws by which events happen. If someone changes the phase by introducing a spiritual transformation, they also then incur the responsibility for those events. And so even though one can do this, it is possible for someone to do this, you are always circumspect, because you realize that if you do this, then it's rare that you're not going to get scathed in this. Now, what is interesting here is to bring 72 into tune with 74. 72, remember, was cherish energy. So 72 is cherish energy, 74 is working through delusion, 76 is beware of brutality. Cherish energy, work through delusion, beware of brutality. In other words, the three of them sort of go together. It's like every other chapter in the Taunting Ching has a natural correspondence. Well, let's look at 75. 75 is greed loss. That's what the Chinese characters translate as, greed loss. What is 73? Daring doing. And what is 77? Heavens down. Let's let 72 be for just a moment. Let's go to 75. Remember now, Lao Tzu has a particular style of writing. He's going to, in this chapter, do what he characteristically does with the structure. He's going to give us a phrase. He's going to put some correlates that not so much causally follow from that phrase, but correlates that go with that phrase. And then he's going to repeat this several times, and that will be the chapter. In this particular chapter, it's going to be 4 of these little vignettes. The 4 initial tuning phrases, it's like the tuning pitch. The first one is the people's starvation. The second one is the people's difficult governing. The third is the people's dismissing death. And then the fourth will be like a coda, wrapping all 3 of these together in a complementary way. Now, who not there? So he's going to talk about the people with their starvation, their difficulty being governed, their dismissing death. But he's also going to talk about, now who not there? Here's how it reads in my translation. The people's starvation, there. Their rulers relish taxes too much, therefore starvation. The people's difficult governing, there. Their rulers are busied, therefore difficult government. The people's dismissing death, there. They're sucking life's intensity, therefore dismissing death. Now, who not there? Life busy one. This one, human, more than esteemers of life. more than those so-called esteemers of life. In other words, there's a phrase in here, esteemers of life, those who claim to be for life or claim to be for the action. Here's how it reads again. The people's starvation there. The rulers relish taxes too much, therefore starvation. Now notice that these three correlates that go with that first phrase, that tuning phrase, the people's starvation, that there are three kinds of the same vowel. There, meaning a place. There, meaning the plural, possessive, and therefore of the consequence. So I'm trying in the English to do what Lao Tzu does in the Chinese. In the Chinese, when Lao Tzu writes this out, it sounds like this. Min qi, qi yi, qi shan, qi shui, qi. So you can hear that his language has a kind of a rhythmic consonance to it that flows. It doesn't have a kind of syncopatic beat. It doesn't have an iambic pentameter. It doesn't have any of these other kinds of rhetorical paces which classical Western languages have. The Chinese is like a fast stream going over rocks purifying itself. It hits one rock after another. So that the succession of the Chinese in Lao Tzu sometimes is like verbal lightning. It's like the roll of verbal lightning. So that Lao Tzu sometimes, when he, if I can use this phrase, when Lao Tzu stands up on his hind legs and roars, his language is like metaphysical lightning in Chinese. He really says what he wants to say, and translators, their English doesn't catch this tone. So I'm trying this. The people's starvation, there. Their rulers relish taxes too much, therefore starvation. The people's difficult governing, there. Their rulers are busied, therefore difficult government. The people's dismissing death, there. They're sucking life's intensity, therefore dismissing death. Now, who not there? Life busy one. This one, human, more than esteemers of life. Who is the life busy one? The one who is tuned themselves, their spirit gen tuned to Tao, so that whatever it is that they're doing, those 10,000 things are in tune with the spirit gen and the Tao. So they're busy doing in a life sense, but not in a phony life sense as someone who's just claiming rhetorically to esteem life. Oh, well, we're for women's rights, and we're for babies' rights, and we're for several automobiles in every garage and all of this. Those are the esteemers of life who just give a rhetorical claim that fits in with the cacophony of this world. It's a delusion. That kind of talking indicates a person who is delusory. No real human being would talk that way. We need a break. Let's take a break here for just a minute. Chapter 76. Literally, it's beware of brute strength. But the emphasis in Lao Tzu, I think, is beware of brutality. Be very cautious about brutalizing yourself, allowing yourself or accepting in yourself any kind of brutality, or of foisting that on someone else, or on a situation. And it's not the same as always being piously gentle. That's not it at all. And so here in Beware Brutality, a very, very difficult chapter to translate. For instance, here again, I'm not picking one. Here's Wing-Sip Chan's translation of 76. When a man is born, he is tender and weak. At death, he is stiff and hard. All things, the grass as well as trees, are tender and supple while alive. When dead, they are withered and dried. Therefore, the stiff and the hard are companions of death. The tender and the weak are companions of life. Therefore, if the army is strong, it will not win. If a tree is stiff, it will break. The strong and the great are inferior, while the tender and the weak are superior. It's just not Lao Tzu. It's kind of, in a way, imitation Victorian doggerel. Pardon me, but that's what it is. It's a forced rhyming syntax that Edwardian gentlemen might scribble on the napkins of their club. It isn't Lao Tzu speaking. His language runs like this. Gen, its life, indeed tender, tentative. His death, indeed stifled, stiff. The 10,000 things, grasses, trees, their life, indeed, tender, delectable. Their death, indeed, drained, dry. Therefore, stifled, stiff ones are death itself's followers. Tender, tentative ones are life itself's companions. Therefore, weapons strong will not conquer. Trees strong will be used up. The strongly great stay rooted. The tender, tentative stay elevated. This is what Lao Tzu says. If he were not writing Chinese but writing English, this is what he says. Now you can pore over that a couple of times, and you can get the sense here that he's using contrast not in a mutually exclusive polar way, but he's using differentiation in a great expressive complementation. He's not saying high and low, strong and weak, as polarities. He's not seeing it that way at all. His great amplified strategic context is down. In harmony with his spirit gen, so that his language that comes out in that fourth phase, in the symbolic phase, his symbolic language is resonant with Te itself. So that his symbolic language has all of the amperage of Te. Because we're still talking about Te here. We haven't even got to the section in Tao yet. To put it in kind of American lingo, we're talking Te today. And we're still talking Te. And in talking Te, we're not talking about power. Because power has a way that it insists that you grab it and use it, and it tends to overdo all the time, and that's where brutality comes into play. It's built into that whole system of delusion. And it's absolutely characteristic of the pride of the ego to suppose that it is exempt from this, because it's just itself. Well, I'm not going to do that. I wouldn't hurt a fly. Gen, its life, indeed tentative. His death indeed stifled, stiff. The 10,000 things, grasses, trees, their life, indeed tender, delectable. Their death indeed drained, dry. Therefore, stifled, stiff ones are death itself's followers. Tender, tentative ones are life itself's companions. Therefore, weapons strong will not conquer. Trees strong will be used up. The strongly great stay rooted. The tender, tentative stay elevated. So he's saying that the complementation here goes beneath the ground and above the ground together. So that when one is really rooted, you are also elevated at the same time. There's a corresponding resonance with your roots and your flowerings. Somebody who's in tune with the infinite is not dealing on ground level with life, but is using roots and sky at the same time. The Bhagavad Gita has this beautiful phrase in the 10th chapter, right after the middle of the Bhagavad Gita, where Bhagavan Vyasa, the author, says there is such a thing as a tree whose roots are in the sky. That Atman is Brahman. Whoever lives in such a way that the tree of their life has its roots in the sky, that's the accomplished yogicar. That's the one for whom the battle is forever won. Not due to the weapons, but the consonants. The greatest warrior never fights a single battle. The greatest warrior wins before the battles are even joined. 77, then, the fourth of tonight's sections, Heaven's Down, Kin Tao. Here again, let's try Winsett Chen's translation. Heaven's way is indeed like the bending of a bow. When the string is high, bring it down. When it is low, raise it up. When it is excessive, reduce it. When it is insufficient, supplement it. The way of heaven reduces whatever is excessive and supplements whatever is insufficient. The way of man is different. It reduces the insufficient to offer to the excessive. Who is able to have excess to offer to the world? Only the man of down. Therefore the sage acts, but does not rely on his own ability. He accomplishes his task, but does not claim credit for it. He has no desire to display his excellence. Okay. Here's what Lao-Tzu says. Heaven itself's down. It seems like stretching of a bow. Oh! The longer one pulls it down, the lower wants to raise up. All our abundance diminishing to who not enough in gifting get. Now you see my English rolls like his Chinese rolls along. Let's try it again. Heaven itself's down. It seems like stretching of a bow. Oh! The longer one pulls it down, the lower wants to raise up. All our abundance diminishing to who not enough in gifting get. Heavens down, diminishing all abundance, yet completes the not enough. Man's Tao is not so. It diminishes not enough, thereby serving additional abundance. Who can have abundance for serving this world? Therefore, Spirit Gem creates yet not claims. Achievement accomplishes yet not attached. Itself not wishing displayed excellence. Okay? Again, it's similar to the Bhagavad Gita, when the Gita says that renouncing the fruit of action is the key. Not renouncing action, but renouncing the fruit of action. To continue to do, but not to do because of any reason, because of any purpose. You say, well, why, where's the smarts in this? It's like this. Aldous Huxley's psychotherapist was a Frenchman named Hubert Benoit. Benoit wrote a book called The Supreme Doctrine, several other books. In The Supreme Doctrine, at the very front, he said, modern Western man is in trouble because he has a problem which is insoluble. Any solution that he comes up with is co-opted by the problem. The problem continues to accept any solution and work it into and make the problem worse. That the problem is in effect a delusion. For once you see that there was no problem in the first place, there's no reason to make up all of these answers to it. And then you can just live life. Your life. The need for solutions is the whole gist of the problem. Learning not to need solutions is waking up from the illusory problematic condition. Because as long as you needed solutions, it reinforced your belief that the problem was really intractable. Because the more solutions you came up with, the more they did not work, and the worse you supposed the problem must really be chronic. I must really be in trouble. I must really be on the edge. When in fact, you are just where you are, not on the edge of anything. So that the intelligent thing is to stop the ping-pong game between problem and answer. Stop searching for ingenious answers, which only fortify the problem and make it subtle and really dangerous. Heaven's down. Heaven itself's down. It seems like stretching of a bow. Oh, the longer one pulls it down, the lower wants to raise up. All our abundance diminishing to who not enough in gifting get. Heaven's down, diminishing all abundance, yet completes the not enough. Man's Tao is not so. It diminishes not enough, thereby serving additional abundance. Who can have abundance for serving this world? Therefore, Spirit Gem creates yet not claims. Achievement accomplishes yet not attached. Itself not wishing displayed excellence. Bang. So that's how it is. Let's compare before we finish tonight. Let's bring out a kind of a Taoist phasing, a grandmother phasing. Let's bring out 72, 74, and 76. Because remember, while any individual chapter may be a little difficult to hear at first, as you hear the natural rhythm that's in the Tao Te Ching, the correspondent harmony, it'll make it easier. So here's 72, 74, and 76. Cherish energy, working through delusion, beware brutality. Without any pause, all three of them together. Because the chapters follow one another like the words in Lao Tzu within the chapters. The chapters roll like a stream of seamlessness and purify itself by just flowing, by just going. The people not afraid of dreaded, great dread comes indeed. Don't ridicule their places of dwelling. Don't weary their places in life. Now when not weary, thereby not weary. Therefore Spirit Ching in himself knows, not himself, regards himself, cherishes not his own treasures. Therefore he discards the latter, choosing the former. The people not fear death, that's how with death scare them. If make the people always fear death, and any do the new, you in not te seize and kill them, who will dare? Always there is a killer to kill, who kills. Now phasing away, killing the killer. This is called taking the place of the great Carpenter's work. Now taking the place of the great Carpenter's work, one is rare, if not injure his hands. Gem its life, indeed tender, tentative. His death, indeed, stifled, stiff. The 10,000 things, grasses, trees, their life indeed tender, delectable. Their death indeed drained, dry. Therefore stifled, stiff ones are death itself's followers. Tender, tentative ones are life itself's companions. Therefore weapons strong will not conquer. Trees strong will be used up. The strongly great stay rooted. The tender, tentative stay elevated. Now we'll take next week 78, 79, 80, and 81, and that'll bring us to a close on Te. So that we will finish Te next week. And as we finish Te, we have to finish Te in such a way that we can allow for the discussion on Tao to come into play without it having to force its way in. How will we do that? Because the 81st chapter has a particular kind of a tone to it. So take a look at several translations of the last chapter of the Tao Te Ching. You can use any copy or any copies that you have. The very first lines, I'll just use Wing Sit Chen's translation, the very first lines are going to concern language and its beautifulness. Now there's a beautiful, very famous in the High Dharma West, a very famous section in Plutonius on the beautiful. And Plutonius is one of the few Westerners ever to be able to write spontaneously, coherently, on the beautiful. Many, many centuries later, 1,500 years after Plutonius. Immanuel Kant, one of the world's great philosophers, wrote a little book on the beautiful and the sublime, when, as a young man, Kant realized what Plotinus had really said, that there's something about language, that language is not a throwaway, unnecessary, veiled encumbrance, but language itself is an invitation to the divine. That's why we pray. That's why we praise. That's why we sing. That's why we tell the truth. That's why we share who we are in words. That's why love must be said. Because language itself is the right energy. It's the right vibration to carry the beautiful through to truth. Lao Tzu will say, true words are not beautiful. Beautiful words are not true. Because if you're looking at the gloss of the words, somebody can be spinning a line up to you. Don't listen to the line. Listen to the speaker who is saying to you, who is this? Under what conditions are they saying what? To you, how are they relating to you? And when all of this is put together in a working whole, then language does a very, very magical thing. It creates the true and the beautiful. And by doing so, Lao Tzu sets the stage for the very first section of the Tao Te Ching. And the very first beginning of the Tao Te Ching goes, in a way, as a displacement for chapter 81. The very first lines of the beginning of the discussion on the Tao that can be told of is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Now, he's not scotching language, because the Tao Te Ching itself is in language. Lao Tzu himself, with great confident love, is speaking to us, is writing to us. He's not saying, do not use language. Only the sophomoric idiots of the so-called New Age say, we don't need language, we just do it with silence. That's not it at all. That's very slovenly. That's someone who never has loved truthfully and never has seen truth at all. For language, when used in a balanced way, so that what is being expressed is the whole complementation, can present the ineffable, but ineffable. So that a lot of language depends on its ability to resonantly dispel illusion. I'm going to bring in something that is a little tangential next week. I'm going to bring in a poem by a semi-Chinese. I'm going to bring in a mystical poem by Milarepa. Milarepa, who was really Tibetan and not a full Chinese, nevertheless is a part of Chinese civilization. He's one of the greatest poets of Chinese civilization. Milarepa was such a titanic spiritual presence that his ashram was Mount Everest. Just to let you get the size of the man. Milarepa, after he had been completely torn down by his teacher was named Marpa. And Marpa realized that somebody as capacious as Milarepa, who had come to him under a false basis. Milarepa was a natural psychic, and when he had seen some robbers kill his mother, he had brought calamitous weather down that killed the robbers. And then he felt absolutely, horrendously guilty because he could do this. He could alter the weather and things like that. He was naturally gifted as a wild psychic talent. So he went to Marpa, and Marpa realized that as long as Milarepa inhabited the persona that had come out of his natural life, he would never forgive himself. Because he loved his mother so much, he wanted to have those bad men dead, even though he felt guilty that he had done it. So he was caught in a bind, and the only way to extricate Marpa was to extricate him from that personality, from that persona. And so Milarepa methodically went about dismantling Milarepa's personality. And he was very successful. He broke Milarepa's ego, broke his psychic continuity, and he used a very interesting technique. He had Milarepa build a meditation hut. He said, you cannot extricate yourself until you build your own meditation hut with your own hands, a la St. Francis of Assisi, taking sand down the animal and rebuilding it with his hands. And when Milarepa built the meditation hut on the north part of this mountainous property, as soon as he finished it, Marpa came out and just berated him up and down and said, you're a complete idiot. I told you to build it in the south and you build it in the north. The exact opposite. It's just like you. To build it in the exact opposite way. What can I do? Take it apart and build it in the right place. And so he dismantled this. He built it out of stone. It wasn't just a reed hut. Lugged all this stuff many miles over and rebuilt the meditation hut in the south. And then he came to Marpa, and Marpa said, you're a complete idiot. You don't have any sense of changing times. It was right in the south before, but the conditions have changed. Now it should be in the east, and you have it in the south. So Milarepa built it in the east after taking it apart in the south. And then, of course, he was told that, you should understand the secret. The secret is we tell you east and you should intuit west. So after he finished all of this, Marpa said, I can't deal with you. You're incorrigible. You keep following along in all these orders that are ridiculous. Why have you done this? Get out. And so Marpa trundled off completely broken down the road, or Milarepa, and then Marpa's wife went out and got a hold of the completely broken Milarepa and said, don't take this from him. Go back there and demand your enlightenment. So Marpa told him that he would have to go and find some meditation place and be there until he could not recognize himself. And then he would receive his enlightenment. The Greek term for it is epiclesis, that when you prepare the right vessel, it receives what it is made to receive. And so Milarepa went off to the lower northern slopes of what turns out to be Mount Everest. And he ensconced himself in this cave. And he was extremely talented psychic. The name Milarepa means somebody who can dry wet cotton by his body energy. And to Tibetan it's called tummo, as a way of making your Manipura chakra energy really heat up from your body. And so the sign of the yogis in the Milarepa tradition are, in this cold Tibetan winter, they put a wet cotton smock on you, and if you don't freeze to death, you pass the test. You have to dry it out with your body, and then let the light cotton be enough of a container for the energy so as to keep yourself warm. So literally, Milarepa means cotton clad. out in the midst of the Himalayan snows. So he sat in this cave and he couldn't move because he was in a yoga position. And there were cracks from the fissures and so forth. And he was able from time to time to reach up and pull pine needles down, or pine needles would fall. And the snow, so he would hold snow in his hand with pine needles, and he would heat it and make a kind of a soup, a kind of a broth, out of pine needles. And of course he just sat there, and all he had was this kind of hand-warmed pine needle soup for years and years. And he turned green because of the chlorophyll in the pine needles. That's all he had. And his hair grew and matted down, and spider webs came, and very leaves fell. And one day, some robbers came into this cave to divide up their booty. And they didn't know that there was a man in the cave. There was just this mound of leaves and cobwebs and stuff, with two shining eyes and green eyeballs watching them. And they were talking about how to divide all this up, and they got to fighting and everything. And finally, Milarepa spoke to them and absolutely scared them because they couldn't believe that there was it, but they thought he was a mountain demon or something. And they became students of Milarepa because he realized that he was no longer recognizable as who he had been. In his long meditation, years and years and years alone, in that condition in that cave, he wrote poetry in his mind because he had all the time that there was. And so later on, he wrote down all of these poems, and because he had done this so long, he wrote what is a poetic collection. It's called in Tibetan the 100,000 Poems of Milarepa. And I'll bring one of those about a snowstorm so that we can see how language sometimes, when it comes resonantly from someone who is completely whole, the language, even in translation, conveys the loveliness of truth, which is beautiful. And that's what Lao Tzu, the Taunting Ching, is like. It's like that. And if we can get that tone, we can treasure the Taunting Ching. Let's use that translation. Lao Tzu himself. So, more next week.